Welcome back to the Foundations of Learning podcast. I'm your host, Shaylee Flint. Today, I'm sitting down with Spencer Russell. He is the founder of Toddlers CAN Read and also the head of literacy strategy at Lovevery. Spencer has dedicated his career to helping parents and educators unlock the power of early literacy, but his journey started in the classroom. In this conversation, we dive into his path from public school teacher to entrepreneur and what led him to rethink traditional literacy instruction and why he believes that toddlers are absolutely capable of learning to read. We also tackle some big questions like why so many schools are still struggling to implement effective reading instruction and what parents can do when their child isn't getting the support that they need. If you're passionate about setting kids up for reading success, this episode is packed with insights that you won't want to miss. Let's get started. Welcome to the Foundations of Learning podcast. I hope to inspire you to actively participate in your child's learning journey, fostering a love for knowledge and nurturing the skills necessary for success in a rapidly changing world. All right, Spencer, I am super excited to have a conversation with you today because you are doing amazing things in the realm of literacy and helping parents understand literacy. And so you are the founder of Toddlers CAN Read, and now you are also the head of literacy strategy at Lovevery. But before we dive into literacy and all of that, I would just love to get to know you a little bit better and your journey that got you to where you are. So my first question for you is, what first sparked your interest in education? Was there like a specific moment or experience that made you realize this was what you wanted to do?
You know, there really wasn't a moment that sparked my interest. It would be like cool if there was. And I'd say like, it was like this amazing experience I had as a kid that made me want to be a teacher, but there really wasn't. I was a liberal arts major, so I doubled in music and psychology in college. And it's not really aligned to a lot of professions. It's like, you can be like a therapist, like a musician, you can do like musical therapy. But really in college, I took courses that were interesting to me and things that I kind of found to be intellectually stimulating. And then by senior year, you're like, what do I do? Like, what's the actual job? And so my journey to teaching was super practical. I was graduating college without a job. Teach for America was hiring people right out of college and putting them in different cities to work and to teach. And I was really attracted at the opportunity to just move somewhere random and to teach. So it's something that was, it made sense for me at the time. And I didn't really develop the love of teaching and education until partway through my second year of teaching, when I kind of made a breakthrough with my classroom and my kids and my families. And at that point, I was like, okay, like this is something I'm going to do for a long time.
And I find it kind of funny too, because I also taught first grade for 4 years, and I obviously went to school to become an educator. I have a degree in early childhood education, and I still feel like it took me a couple of years to like really fall in love with it, because there's so much that you have to learn, even if you go to school in education. But like, I don't also have anything of like, why did you go into education? I was like, I just love kids and I love learning and I love being able to see like that spark. So I think it's kind of funny when there are other educators that are also like, I didn't have this like experience when I was a kid, or, I had this ever since I was a child, I've wanted to be a teacher or whatever. So I find that very interesting. So when you first started your, journey, I guess, into education, did you start by teaching younger children? Is that like your first job was like a kindergarten teacher?
Yeah, exactly. I started as a kindergarten teacher. I taught kindergarten for 3 years. At the beginning, I had no idea what I was doing. Like day one, there was a fire drill at noon.
Oh no.
And it's like, I hardly knew my way through the school building. I certainly didn't know what to do during a fire drill. I had 24 kids that I was in charge of. And one of them had just peed their pants.
Oh no.
And he was kind of like a couple feet back from the door, just like looking at me with like pee coming down his pants.
Oh no.
And I remember looking at him being like, what am I doing? Like on it, like what, like, I don't, do you stay? Do you go home? Do you have extra pants with you? I don't know. There's a fire drill. It's loud. Do we get in line? Where do we go? Like, no idea what I was doing in kindergarten. Very, very little prep, which is its own issue on the side. But then I moved to first grade. After those first 3 years, I really, really liked first grade. And to your point, I think you can have any sort of like feeling about teaching that you want before going in. You have to experience it and live it and see if it's right for you. Because I also know a lot of people who like, you know, they're like, I'm born to be a teacher. I love teaching, and they teach, and it's really hard, and they stop. You know, so it's a job that's going to challenge and push you, especially in the public school system.
Oh, for sure. And kindergarten is kind of like, especially not having any sort of, training, I guess you could say, in classroom management, even, because that's like the biggest thing when you're a teacher is you have to understand classroom management. That is like the very first thing. And then learning comes after you know how to manage a classroom. And kindergarten is kind of like them throwing you overboard with no swimming lessons and no life raft. And they're just like, do your thing, Spencer, because that kindergarten is really, really hard. I student taught in kindergarten and decided like I would love kindergarten, but also maybe just like first grade was like the perfect like in between. And so I am so sorry that was your first day of teaching. I'm probably the one that would have been like, all right, I quit. Mercy, I'm done. That's a rough first day for sure.
Yeah.
So in that, you were kind of talking about how you started to get into your stride and you started to make progress and things like that. And I know one thing that you really talk about, I listened to your speech on, is it like SDXW, or I don't know all the acronyms or whatever it was.
Yeah. The South by Southwest is SXSW.
Yes, that one. And you were talking about that there was some noticeable challenges that you had within literacy instruction within like your school and possibly even your district. And so what were some of the challenges that you did notice that was happening in the literacy instruction?
There's a ton of challenges. I'll probably start with the fact that many of the kids are behind, and you have some kids who are on grade level, some kids who are ahead, certainly, but that spectrum in and of itself is a challenge to teach to kids who are at such varying levels. But in this case, a lot of kids are behind. They're lacking in kindergarten the skills that they should get in pre-K 3 and pre-K 4. And in first grade, the skills they should get in kindergarten. So you're working to kind of make progress and to move forward, but the foundation in a lot of cases isn't there. So you're working backwards and forwards at the same time. Another challenge is class size and trying to reach 24 to 28 kids on your own, provide differentiation, small group instruction, one-on-one instruction is incredibly important, but very challenging. It's part of why I'm such an advocate for parents, because you can get that time with your kids, even if it's small, even if you're not perfect, you can get that time in. Whereas a teacher, I was pulling time out of my planning block, out of my kind of excellence blocks to get that small group time in with my students. It was, I'm going to be at school from 7:03 a.m. to 4:28 p.m. And my 2 hours of breaks during the day, we're just going to pull kids out of gym and we're going to do some extra reading practice because that's what we need. So I think the class size is another aspect. And then there's the curriculum and there's the teaching and there's the instruction, where I think teachers are going to face one of two issues. You either have a curriculum that is not amazing for teaching reading, and maybe you're relying on some outdated or less effective methods, or maybe you have a curriculum that's really strong, but your implementation, your knowledge of how to implement isn't quite there. So you've kind of got the right script, but you lack the necessary knowledge, the pedagogical knowledge to implement. And so I think for me, like, both those things are true. Like, there was times when like the reading curriculum wasn't great, and there was times when like we actually got better programs and I didn't know how to use it. So I had to go on this journey myself during that process. It wasn't full-fledged science of reading. It wasn't everything we know today in 2025, but this journey of really looking at what are the skills that are the strongest indicators of my kids learning how to read. How do I break them into groups where we target those skills really specifically based on what they need? And then how do we build that up to books that are going to be aligned to those skills? And that was a whole lot of work to get to something that I think could be and should be easier.
As parents, we all want to give our children the best start in life, especially when it comes to learning and development. That's why I'm excited to share a resource that's been a game changer for many families, Lovevery. Lovevery offers stage-based play kits designed by experts to support your child's brain development from birth through age 5. Each kit is packed with high-quality, Montessori-inspired toys and activities tailored to your child's developmental stage, making learning both effective and fun. To explore their range of products and find the perfect play kit for your little one, visit the link down below. By using this link, you're supporting our podcast and you'll be giving your child the gift of purposeful play. Let's nurture our children's curiosity and love for learning with Lovevery. Yeah, and I think you just hit the nail right on the head there, because it's unfortunate that even our universities are failing educators that are going into the field, because I know for a fact that I was taught, and I didn't know this until I started teaching myself, but I was trained in more of a balanced literacy approach. Yes, they talked a little bit about phonics and things like that, but I didn't feel like I really had a grasp on how to teach children to read effectively. And once I got into the classroom, that's when I realized, like, holy crap, I don't know how to actually teach kids to read. And the curriculum I was using was kind of like phonics / balanced literacy, but I didn't have the background knowledge to know how to get these kids reading. And so I was like really, really struggling, even though I was teaching phonics skills, like I was teaching sound patterns or spelling patterns or whatever you want to call them, and not implementing it in a way that was actually going to be effective for them. Like, we weren't really reading with them and spelling with them and using decodable readers. We were using leveled readers. And so even though I was teaching these things, it didn't really matter, because the practice that they were getting was not correlating to like what I was teaching, and I didn't have the background knowledge. And I think another thing that is so important for people to understand is classroom size. It is so crazy, because I taught during the time of COVID, and it was actually kind of amazing, because we did like half of my class was one day, another half was a different day. And I only had like 7, 8, 9, 10, somewhere around there. I can't remember the exact numbers of kids per day. And it was so much easier to get the instruction that they needed to get during that time, although I wasn't very effective because I wasn't using great strategies. But I think that's so important for people to understand that we are one person and we only have like so much time in the day, and every kid is at such differing levels. And it wasn't until my state actually implemented a training called, they call it Letters, but it was in the science of reading, that I started to understand how to actually teach kids to read. And me and my teammate, our curriculum wasn't great, so we just started creating our own stuff to just kind of start implementing. And it was insane how it was like, holy crap, teaching a kid to read is actually really freaking simple. Yep. How come I didn't learn this? Like, this is so simple if you actually know how to do it. And so I do think it's kind of sad that there is a disservice in the fact that a lot of teachers aren't getting this training in the universities, because I graduated in 2019. So it's not like I was, graduated 15 years ago or something like that. So it's kind of sad that that's the case. But I don't know if you even know if universities are starting to teach educators this now, but I don't know that it is.
Yeah, I don't know either. The role I had after teaching was working at a nonprofit where we did professional development for teachers, and we worked with different curricula. The one I used was like a grade 3 to 8 ELA curriculum that focused on the 3 shifts, and a lot of it was related to comprehension and text complexity. And it's another situation where, like, even if you give teachers the right resources, there's a lack of knowledge and understanding around why those resources are built how they are and how to implement them, and a lot of frustration and pushback from teachers who are used to always getting different things and being told to use them. So I can't say for certain what the training looks like right now. I do know, though, that teachers really appreciated our training, because we actually took the time to help them understand why they're supposed to do what they're doing, instead of just telling them, here's a new thing, do it, which is often the case.
And that was the most interesting, because we have actual like neuroscience behind it. Like, it's not just this random strategy that someone was like, it works, do it. It's like, if you look at the way that our brains actually learn how to read, then it's it's more compelling, which is the letters training that I had. A big part of it was looking at the brain and what parts of the brain are actually lighting up with different skills that they need, like phonological awareness and phonics and comprehension and fluency and even vocabulary and so many different things that you're like, oh, okay, so this makes so much sense. And then I think a big takeaway that I learned was that your brain isn't wired to learn to read. And I never made that connection that our brains are not made to learn to read. They're really good at oral language, but not in the way that we actually learn to read and write today, right? Like we're really good with like pictures and things like that. And so you're really rewiring a child's brain, which is something that I had never thought about.
Yeah.
So what led you to step away from teaching, from the nonprofit that you were doing, and start Toddlers Can Read?
I stepped away from teaching because of parenting and to be more present with our newborn. When my wife was pregnant, I knew my teaching career was done, at least for the time being. Although I'd wanted to teach for life, you know, I kind of came to this point where it's like I've found what I love to do. I found what I'm good at. I just, you know, adults, they're whatever, but kids are amazing. And so I want to stay in the classroom, but, you know, with the level of time and energy more than anything that I was putting into the classroom, it didn't feel like I could do that as a daddy and as a teacher anymore. So I left teaching for parenting, and I left the nonprofit I worked at to start Toddlers Can Read, because ultimately, if you think back to the time, it's 2020 going into 2021, the world in large part has shut down. A lot of things have changed. At that point, so many people had lost their jobs, had been unemployed. You've done so many different situations that you never planned on doing. I watched as a lot of people got sick, a lot of people died. Kobe Bryant was a big hero of mine. Kobe and his daughter died. I had a cousin who died. You know, there's so much happening. My genuine belief at that time was I don't want to die doing something I don't love because it makes a lot of money. And to me, that was the nonprofit role. It was relatively easy. It paid really well. It gave me the flexibility to work from home, but I wasn't doing the thing I think I'm meant to do. I don't think I was doing what I'm really good at doing or passionate about doing. And so I had to figure out what that thing was. And that took time. It took about 8 months to really, really figure this out. And I meditated, I thought, I reflected. I tried to carve out time around lunchtime every day just to like go down in this little tree in our yard and sit under it and kind of meditate and think. And at the same time, I've been working with my son, teaching him how to read, starting really, really early, and then kind of worked through for an entire year to the point where he was like 2.5, reading really well. And I felt like I was sitting on something. I thought there was like something to this toddler reading thing. So as a result, I think of kind of like this, what's the word for the crisis? It's an existential crisis. I think that's what I'm saying. Like this feeling of like I should be doing something else and doing something different in life, along with this idea of like I have been in my own time working with my son and his reading and seeing that this is possible. I have the idea for Toddlers Can Read, kind of all at once, and it came like fully formed with the name, with the concept, and I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And at the beginning, the goal was work at my kind of 9 to 5 long enough that eventually the Toddlers Can Read salary will match it, and I'll have this like secure future, and I'll just kind of step away from my job and do Toddlers Can Read full time. I realized really quickly that wasn't going to happen with the amount of time I was spending on work, and I had to just leave. And November 2021, made the choice with my wife. I was going to quit my nonprofit job, start Toddlers Can Read, and at this point, you know, just work really, really hard, as hard as possible, to reach as many families as possible and kind of grow the brand and grow the message.
That's amazing. And I do know, like, with everything that's going on in the school system and looking at how ineffective we are at teaching kids effectively to read and to write, and that it's actually more of the disadvantaged kids that are even, obviously there's becoming a bigger and bigger gap with those kids. And so we know, right, that early literacy interventions are super, super important, and that when a child hits like fourth grade, I think it is, it becomes even harder to catch them up, which I think also kind of has to do with just the way that the system is set up and the fact that they like keep moving from grades, and there's not a lot of like skill-based stuff going on right now. I think that there is a movement of the science of reading and structured literacy that's hitting schools and stuff, but that early literacy piece can be so important for families to help their child to be ahead in kindergarten and hopefully lay like a strong foundation in literacy skills. So I kind of went over it a little bit, but what are your thoughts on like why you believe it's so important to lay that strong literacy foundation in the toddler years? Like, why not wait, I don't know, for preschool years or something like that?
You definitely can wait for preschool years or wait until the kid's older. I personally don't have a dog in the fight. My business is called Toddlers Can Read. I capitalized the word can when I came up with it. Toddlers can read, because I think there's this societal pressure, especially on Instagram and social media platforms, to kind of push back against early learning, to say, okay, we're going to be doing this positive parenting thing or whatever name we want to put on it, that's like super low pressure, low stakes, oftentimes low expectations. And we're going to push away anything academic, and we're only going to focus on XYZ. To me, I saw that it was very frustrating. As a parent, as a former educator, I knew what kids generally were capable of, and I knew what my son was capable of, and I knew that reading was important. So for me personally, I can say my son reading early was important. We have a newborn. He's 7 weeks old. He will be an early reader. I will do the same thing again, because what happened with my son was he learned how to read when he was 2, and he has no memory of learning how to read. All he knows is he loves books. He's read thousands and thousands and thousands of books, and he's 6. And he's read so many different chapter book series. He's had such a positive experience learning how to read. When I was 6, I was learning how to read for the first time at the beginning of first grade, and it sucked. And for me to give my kid the gift of having no memory of learning, but all the beauty of being able to read, absorb knowledge, understand the world around him, he interacts with restaurant menus, with signs, with everything different than his peers. It's so, so beautiful. So will I give that to my 7-week-old? Yes, 100%. It's been just so beautiful. People are scared it's going to cancel out all these other skills, make the kid not social, all this other stuff. Like, it doesn't. It doesn't. Not for me, from other parents too. So it's very important to me that if I have the ability and the knowledge to give my kid this gift, I will. For other people, it's their call. And honestly, I don't spend a lot of time trying to talk about why it's important, because I kind of feel like some people get it and some people don't. And the internet can be very divisive. And so, people who are like, why would you ever do this? They should be learning other more important skills, blah, blah, blah. If that person believes that teaching your kid to read and teaching social skills are exclusive things, that it's an either or, like, yeah, teach your kid social skills. If you have to teach one, that one's more important. But for the folks who understand that you can teach 2 things at once, and you can have a child who's an amazing reader and also an amazing person, I think my message of like, this is possible and it's easy, really, really resonates. And ultimately, parents are going to have to choose when the best time for their kid to learn to read is, and just be aware of the context that you live in. Like, be aware of what school you're zoned to. Be aware of what teachers are there and what the class sizes look like. Be aware of what curriculum they use. Be aware of some of the literacy rates in our country and the fact that kids generally don't become good readers. They're more likely to become a bad reader than a good reader. And if there's a reading gap, that gap is more likely to grow bigger over time, not smaller. These are just realities. And if you understand the reality of your situation and you say, I'm happy to wait and see how it goes, wonderful, more power to you. But if you understand the reality of the situation and you say, you know what, I think I can do this myself. I think I can at least supplement a little bit. I can introduce some letter sounds. I can build a little bit of a foundation, and I can do it now when they'll have no memory of it. I can do it now in a way where we can play and engage and have fun. The way that my youngest is going to learn how to read is fundamentally different from how I learned. And it's going to be so fun for him to play these games and to play these activities. Like, that's the power of what we can do as parents. But whether people do that or not, I'm agnostic. Like, do your thing. I only care that kids eventually become really, really good readers, because for all aspects of life satisfaction, health outcomes, like pretty much any measurable, quantifiable thing that quantifies with like life, it's related in some part to literacy rates.
Did you know that over 60% of U.S. students fall below grade level in reading, and it often starts in the grades kindergarten through second grade? Don't let your child become a statistic. My Science of Reading Simplified course gives you a step-by-step tool to teach phonics, vocabulary, writing, and reading comprehension. If you want to equip your child to succeed, start today. Visit K3homeschoolfoundations.com or check out the link down below to get started. Yeah, 100%. And I think that's one thing too that a lot of people don't realize is how detrimental it actually can be to our society as a whole, and just a person, just an individual person, if they cannot read. Like, it affects so many different aspects that I don't think people truly realize. Like, I think we know that reading is important and writing is important and things like that, but I think it's hard for people to really say like if this kid does not learn how to read, the percentage chance of them, X, Y, and Z happening to them or whatever is higher because they are illiterate. Like, illiteracy does have impacts that's far beyond the fact that they just can't read. And I do think it's important, like you said too, for a parent to make that decision, right? Like, what's going to be best for your child. Nobody should really be telling anyone what to do with their child, because it's their kid. And if they want to wait, they want to wait. If they want to start early, they can start early. And I think one thing that I've noticed on social media is the difference between, people that are maybe educators in the public school system and like homeschoolers. I feel like that's kind of where the divide is happening, is like homeschoolers are like, I'm not going to teach them to read until this time. Or, public school teachers are like, you need to make sure that we have early literacy skills set. And so there's like this information. And I think it's so different depending on the environment in which your child is going to be in, right? Like, if you're homeschooling, you generally can move at a slower pace. There's really not like a set schedule of when they have to learn said skills. Whereas in public school, you do have this like set schedule essentially that they need to have. Like, by kindergarten, you need to know how to do this. And by first grade, you need to know how to do this. And so I think that that's really important for parents to understand as well, because like, if a parent asked for my advice and they were like, what should I do? I would ask them, like, are you sending your child to public school? Are you even a private school or a charter or whatever? Because if that's the case, then I do think that you should start setting a foundation earlier on. Like you said, it doesn't have to be this complicated thing. It can be super fun and you can play games, and they are capable of these things. It's not like they're not capable. But if you were like, I'm going to homeschool, then I'd say, well, it's up to your discretion, like on when you want to start that, right? And so I think that's important for people to kind of get that, I guess, background behind why some people might say things and some people might not. And I have some other beef with some of the philosophies that homeschool parents use in teaching their kid to read, and they do a very like hands-off method, whole language approach, and I'm just like, no. But that, like I said, you do you if that's working for you. So we're going to kind of go into that a little bit, like on the research that is out there, because there's a lot of conflicting research on whether or not young children can develop fluent reading and comprehension. And when we're talking about comprehension, I'm not just talking you're reading aloud to a child and they can tell you what happens. Like, they're actually the ones reading and comprehending what it is that they are reading. For children that are under 7 to 10 years of age, just because the neural pathways for automatic word recognition, or even just that part of their brain, like the word processing part of their brain, right, is not fully developed yet until around the age of 7 or 10 depending on when you start literacy practice. That's an important piece to, say as well. And so based on your experience and research, obviously you have a lot of time teaching parents how to teach their younger children how to read. When they're going through this decoding process and then the fluency and comprehension and all of that, do you notice that the younger kids have a harder time with that fluency and comprehension piece? Do they sound more like robotic when they're reading and then it starts to click as they get older? What are some of the things that you've seen with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think we should start with what comprehension is, which there's kind of multiple components of comprehension. And to really understand what you're reading requires some combination of being able to read it well and effortlessly. We want our brain focused on the substance of what we're reading, not necessarily the phonics of what we're reading and trying to decode and put it together. So reading ability is correlated with comprehension, as is background knowledge. You can have an incredible reader who's reading about something totally unfamiliar. And if that's the case, they're not going to comprehend much of what they're reading. Another correlation is the specific language of the text. So maybe you can decode the text, but it might be using ancient archaic language, which you're less familiar with, or maybe you're reading a Shakespearean play. That's going to be more challenging than a genre that you're really familiar with. And the last layer is text complexity. For this, I think of like a psychological thriller where I watched Inception. I'm like kind of smart and like kind of with it. I'm like an adult and I can like kind of figure stuff out, but like I could not figure out what was going on in Inception because it was so complex as I kind of watched it. You have movies that kind of tell scenes out of order or from a different point of view, or there's a character who looks alive but they're dead. These sorts of things happen in text and can make even an amazing reader really, really struggle because that text is complex. That's how I feel with my mortgage documents. So comprehension is not some end-all be-all. You comprehend or you don't. It's highly contextualized. I can comprehend a lot of things. I cannot comprehend my mortgage documents. Like it is a different thing altogether. And when we look at little kids and their ability to comprehend, we're having to look at all four of those components together. We're looking at what the complexity is. We're looking at the language. We're looking at their reading ability. And what I say, we're looking at their reading ability, their language, the text complexity, and structure, and what's the fourth?
Background knowledge?
Yes. Background knowledge. That's the most important one. Thank you. Oftentimes, when you have a kid who's first learning how to read, what they're missing is the reading skill. And this is going to happen whether a kid is 2 or whether they're 8. If they're just learning how to read, that reading skill isn't going to be there. The comprehension is going to be low. If that reading skill is there, let's say we've got like a 3 or 4-year-old who reads really well, they're probably missing the background knowledge to be able to understand. Likely the language too, but probably the background knowledge to really understand that topic. And if all that's there, maybe it's a complex text and it's one that's a little bit hard for them. But if those components are there, then a little kid can comprehend what they're reading. The issue is rarely do we see toddlers reading really, really well. I would argue kind of before Toddlers Can Read, there wasn't really an influx of parents of 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds really meaningfully trying this. There was a lot of like, your baby can read, memorizing sight words. There was like a little bit of hooked on phonics, but it didn't start this young. Like it wasn't real reading. So I got this pushback when my son was like 4. You know, they're like, oh, like he's like reading well, but can he understand what he's reading? It's like sometimes he can, sometimes he can't. If he's familiar with the topic and it's a straightforward book, he can. If he's unfamiliar with the topic, he can't. Like just like any of us. But as he's gotten older, it's not the brain that's like growing and changing. It is his background knowledge and his schema and his experience with those types of books that's changing and allowing him to comprehend. I strongly, strongly believe that. And this idea that like a part of the brain isn't fully developed so we can't do it, like to me that flies in the face of everything we believe about children, right? Like my like adult brain as like a man wasn't like fully developed, and even then there's neuroplasticity until what, like 21, 22. My like prefrontal cortex, my ability to make decisions and judgment Does that mean I can't make a decision at 14? No, I can. It's still developing, right? Mm-hmm. Like our balance, our motor skills, all these sorts of things are still developing as we age. Does that mean a kid can't walk at 1? No, they can. It means their walking is going to get better over time. Mm-hmm. And I believe the area of the brain people refer to is the left occipital-temporal cortex. I think we talk about the visual word formation area, and we kind of take and obscure this research that is like not fully developed as it is mm-hmm. not capable at all. And again, flies in the face of everything we know about neuroplasticity, about the brain. Brain's allowed to rewire itself and to rebuild these pathways. And there's mm-hmm. no magic age where we say, okay, 7. My kid went to bed 6. They woke up on their 7th birthday. Now it's formed. Now they can read. Bullshit. Mm-hmm. That's not how the brain works. And mm-hmm. we have a lot of Instagram scientists who take research and they take someone else's synopsis of that research, and then they put their synopsis of that synopsis of the research, and they say, brain's not fully formed, therefore they can't do it. Then they look at Scandinavian countries and say, okay, in Sweden and in Finland, kids don't learn to read until 7 or 8 or 9, and they're much better readers than we are in the US. So therefore, this must be true. And they're now confusing mm-hmm. correlation with causation. They're looking at a mm-hmm. simpler phonetic system. They're looking at a different socioeconomic status. They're mm-hmm. looking at, unknowingly, many parents who are teaching their kids to read young at home and then sending them to school, and they're conflating the two. So mm-hmm. I feel very strongly about this. I'm not a neuroscientist. My brother is. But I have read all of the research that people have sent me saying toddlers can't read, and I've mm-hmm. yet to find a meaningful reason why toddlers can't read. And to loop back to the comprehension question, the earlier and the better a child reads, the stronger chance they have of becoming someone who comprehends what they're reading. It will not happen immediately. Your 3-year-old's not going to be a fluent reader understanding Shakespeare. But mm-hmm. if your child becomes a fluent reader, that is one less thing they have to think about while they're trying to understand that text. And what we see far too often in school is this switch between learning to read and reading to learn never happens for many kids. They never make that switch. It's supposed to happen around 2nd grade, but it doesn't happen for them. They're always learning to read, and therefore they struggle with comprehension for their whole life. Mm-hmm. So to me, the question should be not, can toddlers understand what they're reading, but can the 20% of American adults who are functionally literate, can they understand what they're reading? Mm-hmm. Can they function in society? Because as long as the numbers stay what they are, I think our push should be helping more and more kids learn to read fluently, exposing mm-hmm. them to lots of different kinds of texts, building the language, the vocabulary, and the background knowledge so that anyone can understand what they're reading and comprehend it.
Yeah, 100%. And that is one thing, too, that when people look at comprehension, they do have to be very aware of, is that your child's oral language and background knowledge is so, so important in understanding a text. Like, I've had 1st graders that are amazing readers. Like, they're really great readers, but then they don't comprehend what they read. And it has a little less to do with the fact that their brain isn't developed enough, and more to do with that they don't have the background knowledge to fully understand what it is that they're reading. So one thing that I do wonder about sometimes is that decoding phase, right? We kind of go through this phase as early readers where we are segmenting and blending, and then eventually it goes into more automatic, right? That's where like the sight word comes in. Once we've mapped the sounds enough in our brain, that word turns into a sight word, and now we don't have to decode it anymore. It's just a word that's in our working memory, and we don't have to think about it much. So have you noticed that with like these younger kids that they stay in like that decoding phase a little bit longer? Or do they just flip over into, reading like we talk essentially more easily? Do you get what I'm trying to ask here?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the kid. I will say that with the blending stage, it is a trickier stage to teach than the letter sound stage. So many parents find my kid loves doing letter sounds. It's super easy. We're learning all 26 basic letter sounds really fast. Then they get to blending. They try to combine 2 sounds together. Often they start at 3 mistakenly, and we work backwards to 2, and we build back up. And they just can't get their kid to combine those 2 sounds together. If the parent knows how to coach the kid through that stage, which is what I try to provide on my page and in my courses, if you know specifically what to do in the moment when the child makes a mistake, then that kid is going to learn to read really, really quickly. if you don't know how to coach them through that mistake, they're going to stay in that phase. Oftentimes, like, they'll get through this phase quicker with like stronger oral language skills. Obviously, the better phonemic awareness skills in other areas. It's all kind of correlated, but many kids stay in this stage for a long time because it's that lack of coaching, I think, more than age. Now, the parents that I work with, they might get stuck for like 2 months or 3 months, and they're like, okay, it's taken my kid like 3 months to learn how to read these 3 sound words. I would still argue that's significantly faster than school, where we're spending, all of pre-K in a good portion of kindergarten trying to get to the point where we're successfully reading 3 sound CVC words. If it feels slow to get there in 3 months, I think that's a testament to the impact and power of one-on-one instruction from the parent. But, I can't paint with like broad strokes and say it happens like faster or slower. I think it largely depends on that parent's knowledge of just how to coach the kid through that process.
Help your child become a confident reader with letters and sounds. This structured curriculum includes lesson plans, games, and multisensory activities to make learning letters fun and effective. Get started today at k3homeschoolfoundations.com or check out the link down below. Yeah, and I do agree with that. Once I figured out how to actually help a child go from like decoding to blending, I was like, oh, okay, I know how to do it, and I could get the children to do it faster than before. And I had like 10 different ways that I would teach, because it was super dependent on the kid. Like, I couldn't use one strategy for this kid and then, the same one for this kid. Sometimes they needed different strategies to kind of help them, but I do think that's important. And also, I think, like I said before, like, learning to read, we are rewiring the brain. And I think that we often have this misconception of like, we have to get this done really quickly. But when you look at the development of a child, I mean, it takes them a long time to even start to talk, right? Like, it's not going to just overnight, they're going to start talking in full sentences. Like, it takes time for them to learn how to do that. It takes time for them to learn how to crawl and to walk. And we just I don't think we recognize that, like, that time period is longer. And so when you're teaching them a skill, you're like, oh my gosh, we've been doing this over and over again for this much time, and you should have it done, or have it mastered, but we are forgetting that we are rewiring their brain. This is a new skill for their brain to learn. And I think patience is super, super important in that.
It is.
So the science of reading movement has gained a lot of momentum, at least on the internet, for sure. And I know that there are many states and even school districts that are slowly adopting this approach. But what's frustrating for me is I am just always racking my brain. If we know what actually works, we have so much research, like decades of research now, that we know, like, this is how we should be teaching all kids to read. Why do you think it takes so long for the systematic change to actually happen?
I'm actually very curious what your thought is on this. For me, I try to stay out of a lot of it. Like, I realized that I could start a business, speak directly to parents, and not really worry about what's happening outside of my locus of control anymore. Whether people adopt it or don't adopt it, whether they're doing this or that. My guess is it's a combination of money and just financial incentives for different people who are involved, whether that's like the school or the district, or whether that's the curriculum company who's selling it to them. Misinformation about what works and what doesn't work, and at times, like, people being set in their ways and saying, this has worked for this long, like, let's rock with it. But I'm curious what your take is.
No, I definitely think that is a really big part of it. I think money plays a giant role, because schools will adopt curriculums and they have like a contract with these curriculum companies, sometimes for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and they don't want to, or can't, because of budget restrictions, just adopt a new curriculum because we have better research, which is really sad, because obviously our job as educators and the school system is to ensure that these children are finding academic success. But no, I do think a large part of it is that. And then I've worked with a lot of different teachers. I've worked in 2 different districts. And the pushback that educators have as well, on learning something new, kind of like what you said, like in the nonprofit, teaching teachers these new concepts. A lot of the, I'm not going to say all veteran teachers, but there are a lot of veteran teachers that feel like it's just another one of these things that they're going to have to learn. It's going to be a phase that we're going through in the system, and then it will go back to whatever it was before. And then they, so I think that there's like pushback in that way. And I just think that it does just take a long time for research to circulate and make change within the system, because I think schools also are very hesitant to just adopt something out of the blue because, I don't know, someone says that this is the correct way to do it. Yeah. And I don't know that we have a lot of people that are looking at that research and saying, okay, this is actually, like, based on all of the research I've looked at, this is the very best. I know that the Department of Education, that's kind of a part of their pillar, is looking at the best research to teach kids in reading, writing, math, science, history, things like that. And in my opinion, I think they've done a very poor job in that. If that's your job to research these strategies, we should have been pushing this out even earlier than we have pushed it out. But yeah, I think the biggest thing, in my opinion, is money. I really do. Yeah. Which is unfortunate.
It's huge. And I'll say for veteran teachers, I don't blame them. If you've been around the block long enough and had enough people put stuff in front of you. And mm-hmm. I honestly think there's probably an aspect of truth of like, this will change. Mm-hmm. But to me, it's more, right? it's kind of like my health journey, where we are in 2025 with our knowledge of certain things in health, like microplastics, for example. This wasn't mm-hmm. something that was talked about previously. We're starting mm-hmm. to understand that there's a lot of like harmful plastics in our environment, and mm-hmm. it could be linked to cancer and some other things, but we don't really know. So we're trying to figure it out, right? Mm-hmm. I could be like dismissive of that and be like, oh, we're going to think something new in 20 years. Or I can be like, directionally, this is right. And this is our mm-hmm. best knowledge today, so I'm going to try and eliminate this. And in 20 years, we'll probably have a sharper, clearer picture. And maybe mm-hmm. we'll know some more stuff. Like, that's kind of the trend of science and of health, is like we get closer and closer and closer to the target. It's not perfect. It's not absolute. It will change and it will adjust. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean I'm going to go to what we thought 30 years ago, right? And mm-hmm. and assume, that there's no harm here. It's like I'm going to look and say, okay, like, this is legit. I should pay attention to this, and also keep an open mind in the future as it changes and adjusts and as we learn more. I think the same thing can be said of the science of reading.
Yeah, and I love that they coined it the science of reading, because really science is never concrete. Like, we might think we know, and we're like, okay, this, based on the information we have so far, this is what we believe is the right information or the right route. But like you said, science isn't absolute. And I think that's one thing we have to remember as well, is it's not absolute. We're always learning, or we should always be learning and adapting and different things like that. So I think that's super important to look at. So you kind of already mentioned this, but for parents that are, they're at a public school or a private school or a charter school, if they feel like their child is not receiving strong reading instruction in school, what steps would you recommend for them to take at home to support their child's reading development?
If you feel like your kid's not receiving a strong reading instruction, I would first dig into what the reading instruction is. Mm-hmm. And I'd try to do this in the context of a positive relationship with the teacher. This is like one of my number one tips for parents, is like, your starts, build a positive relationship with the kid's teacher. Pour into the bucket immediately. Find out what they like. Find out, do their coffee order. Find out like specific things about them that you can build on. Write little notes to them. Express genuine gratitude. And it's not just to be, deceptive and to get something good for your kid. It's to be like a good person and loving to the person who's taking care of your kid. And then when you do need to have hard conversations, like, can you explain the way that you're teaching reading to my kid? Here's what I kind of know and believe in. I want to see how this compares. You have a little bit of something to pull from. Mm-hmm. And this would be like your kind of preemptive step, is build that relationship with the teacher as much as possible and try and figure out what's happening. Because it could be the case that you're right and the instruction's bad. It could be that the instruction's great and your kid is struggling for one of many different reasons. And so kind of getting to the root of that is going to be helpful. Mm-hmm. You also want to make sure that if you have an approach at home, ideally it's kind of complementing and supplementing and not replacing. It may need to replace if the instruction is poor, but like I would really try and get the school stuff, kind of get my arms around it to understand what's happening there. Then at home, my goal with parents is if you're going to teach your kid to read, we do it a little bit a day. We do it as part of a routine, and we try to make it fun. This is why I joined Lovevery and why I'm working with the reading skill set, because we can target the exact skill a kid needs to work on with a game and then a set of books. And I can talk to the teacher and say, oh, it's these 3 skills that they're really missing. And then I can say, okay, we got 3 games that work on these skills, and we got a set of books that are going to help them with that, right? So it's a lot about finding the issue and then trying to treat it consistently, a little bit at a time, with fun. You can also help your kid with nothing. Like if you know what the skills they're working on, you can get a set of flashcards, get a whiteboard marker, like dirt and a stick, oftentimes. And kind of show and teach and break down the thing that your kid needs, because you have this superpower of one-on-one time. Even if it's 5 minutes a day, you've got this ability to target the exact skill your child needs. And I really want parents to understand that, because a lot of people downplay their teaching ability because they're not good teachers, or they feel like they're not very charismatic, or they're not good readers themselves. It's like all those things are amazing. As a teacher, I would trade every single one of them for one-on-one time with my kids. I would prefer to be a bad teacher who's uncharismatic and a bad reader, which I am. But getting 10 minutes a day one-on-one with every kid, like, hell yeah, I will take that every day of the week, because that's where a lot of progress is made. So don't overthink it as the parent. Try and figure out what's happening at school. Try and find the specific skills your child's working on. If you have the resources and the means to purchase something like the reading skill set that's going to do it in a playful, engaging, fun way, like, let's do it. If you don't, or you're not into that, like, let's just find something super bare bones, like paper and pencil, and let's just show your kid the exact skill they're missing. Let's try and give them some practice reading books that have that skill, and let's build it every day, bit by bit, because your kid's going to make a lot more progress than you think from that one-on-one time.
Yeah, one-on-one time is so beneficial for so many kids, especially those kids that are just struggling to learn to read, even if you're using the most effective resources. And I wish as an educator that I would have been able to provide more one-on-one time, but it was very rare that I would be able to provide that one-on-one time. And when you can provide that one-on-one time, the amount of progress they make and how fast they make it is so it's drastic. Like it makes such a big difference. And I think parents believe for some reason that they're not as capable at teaching their kids. And I think that it's so important for them to understand that they can do it. Like, we're not special because you have an education degree or whatever. Yep. Because like I said, I wasn't properly trained to teach kids to read, and I had to learn as I went. And I think it's so important for parents to give themselves grace in that, because they totally can. And if they have the right resources and they have the right understanding, they can do it. And so I know, like, you have awesome resources as well that help parents to understand how to teach their child, because you can have a great resource like you had said, but if you don't understand the processes, then I think it's hard to implement it it effectively. And I do love Lovevery. I'm an affiliate for them, actually, and I plan on, I'm actually due in a couple of weeks, and so I plan on...
Congratulations.
Thank you. I plan on purchasing a lot of these play kits as well that are really great for their cognitive development. And I do think that the skill sets that you guys have created are super helpful as well to provide play, integrate play into learning to read, and having that hands-on approach, because that's how kids learn. They learn through play. And if you can just teach them how to read through that play, that's even better.
Yeah, I just want to say something about the play kits. With my first son, he's almost 7 now, we had like the play mat from Lovevery, but we didn't have the play kits. I think Lovevery is like super, super new at this point. So we would have been like very like trendy to have it at this point. But we didn't. And with baby number 2, we do. And it is so helpful. I say this as someone who works for Lovevery now. If I didn't, I would say and believe the same thing. It is so helpful to have these resources. Like what we're able to do with him, and you're going to see this with your newborn. It's so incredible, and it aligns so well with my belief that kids are capable. He's 7 weeks, and the ability to like practice skills like visual tracking from like one thing to the next, head turning, tummy time, his like neck strength and his head strength. It is so much further ahead at this stage because of not just the resources, but the guides with them. Because to your point, you get like these black and white cards. You're like, what do I do with this? This is like cool, but what do I do? And then you read and you're like, oh, like many kids have preferential head turning. They'll turn the head to one side, not the other. It can lead to like that side of the head being flat, and it can lead to like this other thing and it not being as strong. So you should do A, B, and C. Try visual tracking. Put the card here and do it across. And we're doing all of it. Like we're like good little students. We're like doing all of it with him. My wife's doing a lot of it. And we can see day by day the change and the development and the progress. And like your ability to like do these things at 7 weeks old is not a competition by any stretch. Like every kid is different. But for us, it's really, really nice to have these resources. And I imagine it's how people feel about reading. As someone who doesn't know a lot about babies, if you don't know about reading, like we do the same thing for you. We're like, here's some really good stuff, and here's exactly how to use it and why to use it. And I think both of those things together really, really matter.
Oh, 100%. You have to have both. I don't think you can have one or the other and be effective. And I also want to point out, I was reading some research and they were talking about your muscles in your eyes and even your neck muscles correlate so much to your ability to track text on a page. And so I think it's so like, that's amazing that we're even starting that process of our motor skills, because our motor skills are so important in learning to read and being able to write, obviously, and hold a pencil correctly and things like that. So that's super awesome. And I'm super excited. Like I said, I want to purchase their play kits for my daughter and, you know, go from there, because I'm that person. I love to make sure that my child's learning always, and we're making sure that we're being proactive and that she's, you know, getting the developmental milestones that she needs. But I don't want to, you know, take too much of your time here. So let people know, how can they connect with you? How can they learn more? And how can they, I will be putting a link obviously for the Lovevery stuff down below, but how can they connect with you?
You can follow at Toddlers CAN Read on every social platform: Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, or visit the website at toddlersread.com, and you can get the reading skill set at lovevery.com. So we're going to be putting out a lot of content on social media coming up soon, and hopefully it is helpful to the listeners and viewers.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. And I think that we kind of went over a lot, and I hope that this gives parents a lot of hope in their ability to effectively teach their child to read and to write effectively, and to, you know, make sure that we are hitting that in the early years, or if you want to, in the later years. But thank you so much, Spencer. I hope that you have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an update. Literacy is the foundation of learning, and every child deserves the tools to succeed. If you're ready to take the next step in your child's education, check out my website at k3homeschoolfoundations.com for resources, curriculum, and support to make literacy simple and effective.